Angel Correa, Tigres beating them here by a goal to nil. More early in the campaign at Dallas. This is Will. Up into the middle, including Suarez, but it's Shaq Mohammed who is there!
And it's all about the left-hand side out first, but with Alex Muil, look at his releasing run, and it's not strapped. The ball is well weighted that Muil can already pick his head up and see what he wants to do with the ball. And when he picks it up, he sees big Sam Sturridge, but it goes beyond them to the even bigger Shaq Mohammed. And what this man can do, the leap, the ball is hit perfectly in the air, and Sam Sturridge contests for it. But it's Mohammed with a stellar leap and the right contact to guide it into the side netting. Make it 2 on the season and make it 2 against your rival, Atlanta United.
Good morning, afternoon, or evening to you, wherever you're listening from. It's Saturday, July 18th. I'm Russell Ries, and you are listening to the Nashville Sports Report. All right, well, we started this week's show with Tony Husband's call of Nashville SC's game-winning and only goal in their return to action against Atlanta United following the MLS World Cup break. NSC appear to have returned from the break with more injuries than they started. While Sam Sturridge returned to action, Crispin Espinoza, Reed Baker-Whiting, and Warren Madrigal were all held out of the matchday squad with lower body injuries, while Andy Nahar and Jason Palacios started on the bench before subbing on with about 30 minutes left. Fortunately, the somewhat heavily rotated side was able to eke out a win against a motivated Atlanta side. But this was a team who started the match missing both starting fullbacks, one of their starting midfielders in Patrick Yazbek, a starting center back in Palacios, and Espinoza, one of the league's best wingers. The introduction of Nahar around the 60th minute opened up the game, and Nashville's depth was enough to secure all 3 points, with Shaq Mohammed's 79th minute header proving to be the game winner. And more help is on the way. Earlier in the week, NSC announced the addition of German-born Tunisian World Cup winger Elias Saad. Up until now, Saad has spent his entire career in the German Bundesliga and Bundesliga 2, and he has also started 2 matches for Tunisia in this year's World Cup. Saad is expected to add additional scoring punch to the left wing position, which has currently been split between Ahmad Qasim and Warren Madrigal. Saad was present at the match last night and is waiting on approval of his visa before he can join the team on the field. On top of the Saad signing, there have been reports that Nashville planned to sign 21-year-old Senegalese midfielder Famara Camara from Ranheim in the second tier of the Norwegian pyramid. In addition to having an all-time name, Camara appears to be more of a defensive midfielder, which is a position the Coyotes need filled. The boys in gold have had a lot of previous success with players from Norway, including Eddie Tagseth, Patrick Yazbek, and Maxwell Woleji. Hopefully, Camara can continue that Norway to Nashville pipeline success. However, the team is yet to officially announce his signing, so we will have to wait until then to find out. Nashville SC will be back in action at GEODIS Park this Wednesday evening when they host CF Montréal at 7:30. This week, the Titans announced that they will be inducting Chris Johnson into the team's Ring of Honor during their Week 1 game against the New York Jets. The honor was always justly deserved, but was also made more pressing by Johnson's recent announcement of his ALS diagnosis. It is sure to be an emotional time at Nissan Stadium, as the Titans legend is enshrined amongst the franchise's best. Additionally, this week, Netflix released Season 3 of their show Quarterback, which features Titans starting quarterback Cam Ward. The show gives great insight into Ward and his mindset as he navigated a tumultuous rookie season that saw his head coach fired early on and the team only win 3 games. Ward comes across as a fiercely competitive yet blunt and oftentimes funny individual who has the skill and, more importantly, the work ethic to become a great QB in the league. The show is a must-watch for any Titans fan who wants to learn more about their team's starting quarterback. Titans rookies will report for training camp this Thursday, July 23rd, with the veteran players joining them the following Tuesday, July 28th. Both the NFL and college football are just around the corner. This week, the Nashville Predators announced their 2026-2027 schedule with a humorous TV-themed announcement video. My personal favorite bit was an HGTV-style show that made fun of the Dallas Stars for their planned move to Plano, Texas, on the outskirts of Dallas. The Preds' home opener will be October 1st against the Minnesota Wild. This year, fans will be able to watch locally broadcast Predators games on The Spot Nashville 28 using an antenna, cable, or satellite connection. It was also announced this week that longtime Predators assistant GM Jeff Keelty has left the organization to take a similar role with the San Jose Sharks. Finally, the Nashville Sounds are 53-41 and still 2 games behind the Memphis Redbirds for the division lead. They are currently in the middle of a 3-game home series against the Norfolk Tides, with games tonight and tomorrow before they head to Sugar Land, Texas on Tuesday for a 6-game series against the Sugar Land Skeeters. My guest this week is Matthew Sullivan. Matt is a senior developer at Atiba where I work, but he has also had about 2 decades worth of experience creating software to make data-driven decisions in fantasy sports and to simulate real-world sports outcomes. I spoke with Matt this week about his love of sports and how his sports-related software has evolved over the past 20 years. I also managed to claim victory over him in a fantasy league which he did not join. So please enjoy the egg on my face and my conversation with Matt Sullivan. Okay, well, Matt, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate you taking the time. I'm just going to mention up front, Matt and I work together at Atiba, have worked on some projects together before, which is how I got to know about some of the work you do with fantasy sports and sports modeling that I think is really cool. Also, one feather in my cap was that this past year I actually beat you in fantasy football, which made me feel really good. Sorry, I just want to get that out of the way now. I know that's not good hosting, but thank you for coming on the show, Matt.
I'm a little confused because I didn't actually play fantasy football last year.
Oh, you didn't?
No.
Oh, well, I won the league, so I assumed.
But it wasn't me.
All right, well, we're going to keep that in because it shows the fallibility of me as a host. So I have these questions that I like to ask everyone who comes on the show. My kind of gauntlet of questions for people starts with, what is your favorite sport to play?
When I was a teenager, late teens, my favorite sport to play was beach volleyball. There's a sand court over at Centennial Park, and I'm old enough that the original Top Gun movie had just come out, and we practiced the high fives that Tom Cruise did in that movie. And my friends and I played 2-on-2 volleyball that entire summer before my senior year of high school. Still my favorite sports play.
That's pretty awesome. And did you see the new Top Gun and how they made sure to have like another sports montage in there?
Yeah, it didn't hit the same.
No.
I was impressed at how good that Tom Cruise looks at his age, but I don't even really remember much about that scene other than just marveling at what privilege and wealth can do for a physique.
I guess when it's your job to look good, you go all out. All right, so moving on to, what is your favorite sport to watch?
On TV, my favorite sport to watch is basketball, but in person, it's baseball. Just because I typically can't afford good seats for NBA games. In fact, I've never been able to afford good seats for NBA games. But I just love the relaxing feeling of just hanging out at a baseball game, spending time filling out scorecards, that kind of thing.
Nice. You been to many Sounds games this year?
Not this year, but have been to a good number of games at the new place and lots of games at the old Grish Stadium.
Sounds are pretty good. They're still second or third in their division right now. I think they're, just 2 games back of Memphis at the moment. But I actually have yet to go to the new ballpark, but I have many fond memories of Greer. All right, that kind of leads into the next question I have, which is, what is your earliest sports memory?
That's a tough one. It kind of depends on what you consider sports. I remember watching the old Memphis wrestling with Jerry Lawler on TV as maybe a kindergartner. And most of my early sports memories are of watching the Braves on TBS and the Cubs on WGN. But as far as playing sports, I was playing basketball at the boys club which I don't think exists anymore, but used to be over Thompson Lane, like in a really hard to reach place, really steep hill that you would drive down. There were pretty good basketball players in the early 80s that played over there. The one All-American for Belmont played in the same league that I did.
That's pretty cool. And yeah, I remember the TBS WGN double-headed monster of Braves and Cubs, and thinking that was like really normal. It's weird now to look back on that and realize we were just kind of getting spoon-fed other people's local channels, but they were great.
I mean, there was a time when most people were either Cubs fans or Braves fans if they didn't have a local team.
Yeah, it seems like now we're a little bit more overrun with Cardinals fans as well.
Yeah, that's happened in the last 15 or 20 years. I've noticed that too. People are equally likely to be Cardinals fans or Braves fans, and there's occasionally Reds fans.
You know, I had Nancy Schultz from Music City Baseball on a few weeks ago. She's one of the board members behind the Nashville Stars and the push to bring Major League Baseball here. And she feels very confident that probably by the end of the decade, there will at least be an announcement that a team is coming. And it does make me wonder how much conversion we'll have, or if it'll be kind of like, sort of like with the Predators when they first came and all the folks down in Spring Hill who had moved from Detroit, Pred Wings fans, you know, like Preds fans until the Wings came to town. I wonder if we'll see a bit of that for maybe the first generation of the Nashville Stars.
I would assume that we would. I don't know that there's any city in America that would be any different, honestly. And I don't know if you even want me to talk about it, but I typically think that stadium deals are always bad for the community. But if we did get a baseball team, I would go. You know, so it's one of those things where I'm not sure if it's the right thing for Nashville economically, but if it did happen, I would support it 100%.
Yeah, so Nancy came on the show, and I didn't get the impression that they just expected that the city and the state would cough up a bunch of money. It sounds like they have given a lot of thought to whichever and whatever way they can to get a stadium in place.
I think the biggest obstacle for sports teams in Nashville right now is just getting to the games and back. I used to go to 25 Cubs games a year, and it was as easy as getting on the L, getting off right at Wrigley Field, watching the game, get back on the train. I'm back at home in an hour and a half, with very little hassle. It's just kind of draining to go to some things in Nashville right now because of the traffic and just the lack of public options to get to games.
I totally agree. I don't want to mess with all that. Okay, how did you end up in Nashville? You mentioned playing high school ball here. Were you born in Nashville?
No, I was born in a small town in Illinois. My parents moved to Nashville when I was young. Actually, my dad worked for Lipscomb High School and University, operated the scoreboard at high school and university basketball games. But grew up here and then moved back to the Chicago, Evanston area for grad school.
Was the small town on the outskirts of Chicago or southern Illinois or?
No, it was over near the Iowa border. I'm not even sure what town I was born in because there's several that are really close together there. I know that when we would go back and visit my grandmother, there was only a Dairy Queen. There was a walk-up Dairy Queen, not even a drive-through.
Oh, wow. Okay. I asked because my mother-in-law is from Herrin, Illinois, and we recently got to visit a few years ago, and they were the same way. It's like a little square, and they had a place called Made Right Burgers.
We weren't even really into Made Right when we lived there, or even when we would go back to visit my grandmother. But it became a thing because of Roseanne. There was an episode of the Roseanne show that had something to do with those Made Right sandwiches. The thing that we really did like there was there's really, really thick milkshakes. There's a place called Whitey's and one called Country Style. And I think Whitey's actually ships on dry ice nationwide, but it's, pretty expensive.
It's funny. Down in Herrin, they're, I guess, got a big Italian population. So like one of their big sort of, I don't want to call it a regional cuisine because it's not, but like fried raviolis was like a big thing down there. And I think they had a store that would ship them similarly, maybe not on dry ice. Okay, pivoting back to Nashville after that little Illinois interlude, what is your favorite Nashville sports team?
Right now, it is the Norman Binkley Elementary Club soccer team who did win their division this year.
Hey.
A very exciting group of fifth grade and under kids.
That's awesome. It's just the first time they've made an entry into this list, and congratulations to them. What is the mascot?
Oh, the school mascot is, I think it's a Blue Jay.
Okay, go Blue Jays.
It's a mixed gender team, so girls and boys on the field together. A lot of fun. Good parents, supporting their kids who are pretty good, to be honest. Much better than I've ever been in my life. And we're talking about pretty small kids. So it's impressive to see how well they're able to play that game.
That is cool. Really cool that they won the division. Congratulations again to them. Okay, well, this may tie into that, but what is your favorite Nashville sports memory or moment?
I wasn't in Nashville for the Music City Miracle, but my wife and I did move back to Nashville sometime around 2005. And I used to have Titans season tickets, and I won their season ticket holder fantasy league. And the prize for that was 4 box seats and a suite to see a Texans game. And they let me take my friends out on the field before the game, and Titans players were tossing the ball back and forth with us. So that was pretty cool.
That does sound really cool.
Yeah, I got assigned football, but we moved a few years ago, and I don't know if the football made it through the move. Haven't found it yet.
What year would this have been about?
I'm going to guess 2014, 2015, somewhere in there.
Cool. Yeah. And did you get like the little placard or whatever you hang around your neck, field pass, all that kind of stuff?
Well, it's not like we were the only ones on the field.
Right, yeah.
There were many of us that day. I'm not sure what everyone else was there for. They're probably much more important people than me. But yeah, one of the Titan staff members came to greet us at the stadium and then took us down the elevator. We did get stopped by security a couple times. I think it would be great when the new stadium opens up just to give people tours of the inside of the stadium, because it was fascinating just walking through that part of the facility that most people don't ever see. Probably enjoyed that actually more than being on the field, to be honest.
Yeah.
But if I got a lanyard that day, I didn't retain it. Call me cocky, but I figured that was the first time of many times I would win their fantasy league.
Yeah, I'd love to see that. Love to see that at the new stadium. That reminded me of when I was in Boy Scouts back when they were opening the arena. They did what they called the Great Flush Off. The whole thing was to test the water system, and they literally got 500 people or something, and everybody flushed the toilet at the same time just to see if the water system could handle it.
Do you think that's just symbolic? Because surely by that point they know whether it's going to work or not, right?
Well, I mean, maybe.
Like, what if it doesn't?
Got a bunch of Boy Scouts getting flooded out in the new arena. And maybe it was just I don't know. They had T-shirts and everything, and I didn't actually get to go that day. I was sick or I was doing something else, and I always wished I had a great flush-off T-shirt. Okay, no way to pivot from that, so I'm just going to go into my next question, and this is specific to you. It doesn't have to be who you think it should, but who is on your Mount Rushmore of Nashville sports?
Well, I'm glad you said it could be specific to me, because mine is really, really specific. Like I said earlier, my dad operated the scoreboard at Lipscomb basketball games. And when I was young, I got to go to the women's team games, which always took place before the men's. But my bedtime was early enough that I had to go home before the men played. So the best women's basketball player that I saw growing up was Amy Fuller. She was Miss Basketball 2 years in a row. I think the first 2 years they actually had that award in the TSSAA. And then she went on to play for Virginia and then came back and transferred back to Lipscomb. So she would be on it. And then Philip Hutchison, John Pierce. Philip Hutchison held the college record for most career points scored in basketball. And then 4 years later, John Pierce beat his record. So within the space of 4 years, 2 different Lipscomb basketball centers held that scoring record for college basketball. College basketball meaning NAIA. At that point, Lipscomb wasn't NCAA yet. So those 2 guys would be on Mount Rushmore. And then Don Meyer, who was the Lipscomb coach at the time, who was at one point the winningest coach in basketball history. I think Bobby Knight passed him eventually.
Wow, I love
again, very specific to me, but
no, that's great. That's exactly what I want. I feel like I've just learned quite a bit. I didn't know about pretty much any of that. I mean, a little bit, but like that we had back-to-back scoring champions gracing Nashville. It's pretty amazing stuff.
Yeah, and Don Meyer was one of the most respected coaches in America for a long time. One of my clients is actually a college basketball coach. I've built an app with her. She knew Don Meyer really well. So, yeah, old school coaches all know who Don Meyer is.
That's really cool. I feel like I remember sort of the tail end of his career just as a sports fan in the late 90s, but maybe I'm making that up in my head, or maybe I'm thinking of Rick Bird. I don't know. Don't mean to do that
Yeah,
to a Lipscomb fan, but
I don't remember when Don left. I know it was because the administration of the school wanted to move to Division One. And it's not that he was opposed to that, but he had recruited a whole group of players under the promise of playing in a different division. And obviously, when you move up a division, you're not going to be very competitive at first.
Yeah.
So I know that Coach Meyer felt it was unfair to that group of kids that he had recruited to basically sentence them to 4 years of losing teams.
And what a testament to his character. I feel like that is antithetical to a lot of what you hear about the ruthless nature of sports and like, oh, we got to get better players and yada, yada. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, Buster Olney wrote a book about him. Worth reading if you get a chance.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Definitely check that out. Okay. So moving on from that, do you have any Nashville sports hot takes or conspiracy theories that you want to get off your chest?
No conspiracy theories, but my hot take is it's hard to root for a team, even if the players on the field are good, if the front office is subpar. And it's been hard for me to be a Titans fan knowing that they were the only team in the NFL that didn't have a full-time analyst position until 2021. They were the last team in the NFL to actually start working with data, and it only happened 5 years ago.
That is pretty wild. I do think, in fairness to the Titans, that they're catching up. They're modernizing. I think Mike Bergonzi is doing a lot of work in those spaces. In fact, I would say the same with the Predators. You know, Chris McFarland just came in as the new GM there, and I didn't realize that the Preds analytics crew was so understaffed, but apparently it was like 1 or 2 people. You know, that's just not going to cut the mustard. So I take your point there. I feel hopeful. Maybe it's the homerism in me, but I feel hopeful about both those teams now and their front offices, the brain trusts running them.
As a Cubs fan, I don't think it's a coincidence that that we finally won, after bringing in the OX team. I'm not so naive as to think that just because you have an analytics department that suddenly you're going to be a contender. Baseball now, everybody has one, so that playing field is pretty level at this point. But it does raise the floor, and the floor for the Titans has been pretty low in the past few years.
Yes, indeed it has. And, you know, again, there's sort of this competitive thing and the nature of things. You would think that anyone that's professionally trying to win games would want to pursue every avenue that could give them any sort of advantage, or even in the case of the Titans, put them on a level playing field with their competitors.
Yeah, I've heard they've made great strides. I think they were, by their peers, voted second most improved analytics department in the NFL. That's a pretty obscure title, but it does speak to your point. It seems like they're correcting that course now.
I'm glad for that, and I didn't know that. That's cool that they got voted that, though. That's good. Okay, my final question for everyone is not a sports question. It is, what is your favorite restaurant in Nashville?
I've spent the most money at Baja Burrito, which is a fantastic place to eat. Great people work there. I think one of the best meals I've had in my life was at Kisser a few weeks ago.
Ooh,
Japanese restaurant.
Yeah.
I just can't wait to go again. In fact, it made me want to take cooking classes. Not that I could ever reach the level of the chefs there, but I just couldn't believe how good a meal could be. I mean, it didn't cost an arm and a leg, so I'm a big fan.
Kisser, that's a great answer. And Baja Burrito as well. What's your go-to Baja order?
It varies, but usually a burrito and chipotle with either the Tampico pork or the grilled salmon. And I like the spicy sauces.
Nice. Yeah, I like that Tampico pork as well. Talking about Kisser, my wife and I recently met some friends at the new Chinatown out in Antioch, which at the moment is just like a really incredible grocery store. If and when you start taking those cooking lessons, you can go get any kind of rice. They got multiple styles of soy sauces and just anything you could think of. It's a really cool spot if you haven't checked it out yet.
That's one of the great things about Nashville is I think maybe less than a mile and a half from me, I can get to a Korean grocery store, an Indian grocery store, and I can get to a Mexican grocery store. So I've got all kinds of spices, all kinds of things available to me that just would have been hard or impossible to get in Nashville when I was growing up.
Yeah, totally. I feel like the one thing that we're kind of still missing on the food scene, at least for me, I would like to have just sort of like authentic Northern Chinese food, the kind of thing you can get down in Atlanta on like Old Buford Highway at Masterpiece or at North China Eatery or some of these places. I'm going to make myself too hungry talking about it, but I do wish we had a little bit more of that. But I do think also we're on the come up.
Yeah, it's wild to see Nashville as a destination for foodies now. I never thought that that would happen when I grew up here.
Yeah, it is wild. I used to do a little cooking, and I worked at Flight back when it was like one of the few kind of fine dining places in town. But to think of sort of what the scene looked like then compared to now is just kind of crazy to think about. Moving right along then, I mentioned it earlier. Turns out I did not beat you in fantasy football last year because you were not in the fantasy football league. And the year before that, I believe you convincingly beat me. So we'll leave that aside. But you have done some really interesting and cool stuff with fantasy sports and with data modeling around sports. And I wanted to kind of dive into that with you because I just think it's really neat to hear about. But I want to start with sort of how did you initially get into fantasy sports? Or did you get into the data side first? Or sort of what brought you to that?
Well, I went to grad school at Northwestern. I was in grad school for a PhD program in English. And while I was there, I worked with a professor named Martin Mueller, who had this wild idea that Shakespeare had actually plagiarized his own earlier plays because he had a financial stake in the theater company. So the quicker he could pump plays out, like he directly stood to benefit from that because new plays would typically mean, more paying customers. So we did like an early form of text mining on Shakespeare's plays to find passages that looked to have been rewritten from earlier plays. I wasn't even sure I believed it at the time, but it turns out that he was onto something. But while I was there, I realized that I enjoyed the data part of what we were doing more than I actually enjoyed the text itself, and decided to shift my career from that PhD in English to working in tech. So I started building models somewhere around the early 2000s. And when that became something I did with sports, would have been 2005, 2006, which was the first time I played fantasy football. Once I figured out how it worked, I was hooked. Started building spreadsheets with macros that could calculate player values on the fly during a draft. I started doing auction drafts really early on, and every time a player would get bid on, I would update my spreadsheet to see if that player was in the optimal configuration of players available at my current budget. I've been working with fantasy drafts and even in-season management and technology for around 20 years at this point.
Okay, I got to go back to the fact that Shakespeare plagiarizing himself is what led you into fantasy football in a roundabout way, which I love. And that's so cool that that paid out and that Martin Mueller, you said the professor's name, that
Yes.
he was on.
Are you going to fact check me now? Okay.
No, I just want to learn more about it. I might try and find like a link to his work. That's really cool stuff to me. Like that we can use analytics and data to prove that Shakespeare was plagiarizing himself in order to get more work pumped out. That's I think incredibly cool. So you said it started around 2005 or 6. Do you have any early sort of favorites from that era, like fantasy guys? I know LaDainian Tomlinson was huge then, and there was Peyton Hillis for a few years there. Were there any early ones that you fondly remember kind of like hitting on?
Yeah, it's funny that you said Tomlinson because that was my first thought. Probably one of the others that's maybe a little bit more obscure is Marcus Colston, who was classified as a tight end, I think, for the Saints, but was actually one of the leading wide receivers, at least his breakout year. So I think a lot of people won fantasy leagues that year because they could put one of the best wide receivers in the league in their tight end slot. Yeah, I remember that pretty fondly.
Man, that's remembering some guys right there. Marcus Colston, great call out. When you started creating these spreadsheets and building out these macros, what's the thought process there early on to sort of start breaking down positional value or finding your optimal price in a draft?
It's easier in football because in football, you don't typically have categories like you do in roto baseball, or a lot of people play categories with basketball, but fantasy football is almost always points leagues. So positional value, that's really the main question that you're trying to solve at that point. And there's a, well-documented concept of value-based drafting on the internet. But quarterbacks score points, running backs score points, wide receivers score points. Quarterbacks typically score more points than anybody else. Most good fantasy players take them near the end of a draft, unless you can get someone like Josh Allen without overpaying. And value-based drafting, just you find the number of teams that are in the league. Say if there's 10 teams in the league, you find the player with the 10th ranked projections, and that's your floor. In my spreadsheets, that person would have been a 0, and then the top ranked quarterback would have been just the difference in points. So that kind of levels out the playing field, and it makes it pretty easy to compare apples to apples. How much more valuable is this running back than this quarterback?
To hear you break it down like that, it makes total sense, but I don't think I would have arrived at that. Like, I kind of know, all right, there are fewer running backs, so I probably try and take, if I can get a workhorse early, I'll do that. Or, if I can get a high-scoring receiver, and then, quarterbacks, depending. But to turn it into numbers and into points is very smart. So have you...
It feels like that's the only way to do it to me, Russell. So it blows my mind sometimes, and I'm not like denigrating you.
No, denigrate away.
But I'll sometimes see people ask questions online, like, if I use these scoring settings in my league, how is that going to skew things? And I'm like, haven't you run the numbers yourself? I just assume that people do that. And it looks like a lot of people just, have ranking sheets, or, just have this, like you said, just a general idea of, here are the players I'm going to target. I don't think that that's the way that you do a fantasy draft. I think you just react to whatever value is available, when it's your turn to pick. Or I prefer auction drafts. So is this player worth $1 more, or should I have a completely different configuration of players that doesn't include this player at $1 more?
I mean, I'll be honest, for me, it's a little bit of the general plan of knowing where you are in the draft. I'm mainly snake drafts. I do like 1 or 2 leagues a year, and I'm not crazy with it because I think my wife would kill me, but I kind of have a general idea of the first few rounds. But then a lot of it for me is emotional. It's like, do I want to cheer for or against a particular player? I will oftentimes pick players from the Titans division, because then that kind of offsets some of the pain of them doing well against the Titans. It's like, oh, okay, well, Brian Thomas scored a touchdown, but at least my fantasy team's doing better for it. And then, towards the end, I try and take a few flyers on lots of times Titans players that I think might hit or whatever it might be. But yeah, I imagine that a lot of people are more leaning towards my approach than yours. Just have a little bit of a hunch here or there. I have a general idea. And then ESPN puts out their rankings, or whoever puts out their rankings. And I think a lot of people will default to that. I wasn't able to attend one of my 2 drafts last year, and so I let it auto draft. And I think I probably ended up having a better draft with the auto draft than I would have on my own. And that was sort of following kind of more your approach, is what do the numbers say? What dictates based on rankings and whatnot? But yeah, I think for a lot of people, it's more vibes based than data driven, but maybe that's just me.
I think some people think my approach isn't fun, but I enjoy it so much more than if I were just winging it. I think some people do like to do what you're saying, and, just pick players that you enjoy watching, don't over prepare, react in the moment, that kind of thing. And that's cool. But I get a great deal of enjoyment and gratification from building the system that, produces the best results. That to me brings a great deal of joy.
Dude, I totally understand that as well. And so I used to be in a dynasty, individual defensive player, the whole thing. And I remember during the off seasons, I would try and build out some data on my team, other teams, identify needs of people, and sort of plan out my draft that way. And creating that, I ended up with pages on each team, and there was real enjoyment in that for me, and in a sense of pride to have pulled out data, pulled out information that I could utilize to get a leg up. So I totally understand the joy of building it and generating your own data and then being able to utilize it effectively. I can totally understand that. So, having built out all these things and being involved in creating data around this stuff for the last 20 years, have you noticed any sort of trends or any changes in the way fantasy works or how people approach fantasy? Are there any things that you're seeing now that you didn't see when you first started doing this?
think most players are generally smarter now. Lots of players use paid subscription sources. So in fantasy football, like Football Guys is one that I used to use a few years ago. Really good content there. There's kind of like universally known best practices at this point that 20 years ago we didn't all share. Just small things like if there's a Thursday night game in the NFL, then if you're going to play one of those players, don't put them in your flex slot because, when Monday night comes around, if someone gets unexpectedly injured, you want to have the most freedom possible to take someone off the free agent pool and put them in that slot. You don't see other players taking quarterbacks early as often or defenses as often. Just the internet and the, Reddit has made it easier, I think, for people to share information about strategies that work and strategies that are suboptimal.
Yeah, that makes sense. I didn't know it was called streaming at the time, but I remember kind of being early to streaming defenses and kickers and just thinking like, I'll just pick up whoever matchup based. And then a few years ago that started seeing that term and it's like, no, darn it, everybody's doing it now.
That's actually what I'm doing right now is I'm drafting at least 25 teams and drafting the worst possible teams that I can. I've actually written code that takes the players with the lowest projected points in ESPN. And I'm just filling my rosters with them because I'm just going to stream every position all year. I don't think that that's going to be a winning strategy, but next year it'll give a baseline so that if you want to punt an entire position during your draft, you know about what you can expect if you just stream that position all year. Instead of drafting a tight end, let's say in the 5th round, you can draft another running back just with an idea of if I just pick up whoever I want every week, I'm probably going to score 120 points or something like that.
That is interesting. So I take it that you run a number of experiments each season, each year that it comes around. Is that sort of to continue to build out your data sets?
Yeah, when I was most involved in fantasy sports about 10 years ago, I would usually have 75 teams, either in baseball or football or basketball. And 25 of those teams would be built to win. And 50 of those teams would be built to try out different strategies or to establish those baselines I was just talking about. So I would have 25 baseball teams where I just streamed the hitters every day so that I knew the next year if I wanted to stream a catcher instead of spending for a catcher, I could expect a certain amount of production. So that worked really well. The supposed to win usually did really well. And even lots of those 50 teams would finish pretty high. But they were the ones that gave me the ammunition for next year. So it was kind of like this cycle, train with the 2/3 of the team so that you can win with the other third.
So in a sense, you actually had a fantasy farm system where you were
kind of
developing your future teams. That's very interesting. You mentioned fantasy baseball, and you told me once previously about some of your exploits and accomplishments with fantasy baseball. Would you mind sort of running down some of that?
Yeah, so like you said, playing fantasy sports does take up a good amount of time, especially if you start doing research and you want to take it seriously. So I went from using Excel spreadsheets to draft teams to writing Python scripts to actually do the drafts. So that involves, reverse engineering the ESPN API. And I could then just hook my team up and let it draft in the way that I was describing earlier. It would be constantly recalculating values that it would unemotionally draft the best team available, either with the draft slot that I had or with the budget that I had in auction drafts. And then if you've got that many teams during the season, obviously that would be a full-time job just to set the lineup every day. So I've built bots that would set the starting lineup and actually add and drop players every day based on matchups, particularly important in baseball. The ESPN standard league rules at the time really encouraged streaming that you're just talking about. There was a limit on the number of pitchers you could start in a season. There was no limit in the number of hitters that you could field and no limit on the number of innings your pitchers pitched. So I would try to hit 200 starts. My algorithm would hit 200 starts with the pitchers, and I would pick up starting pitchers off the waiver wire that just had really good matchups, playing in pitchers' parks, playing against poor hitting teams, and fill up the other pitching slots with either closers or middle relievers to get saves or to help my ERA and WHIP ratios. I typically did not touch those teams All I did was set up the code that drafted and managed the teams. And in 2016, ESPN used to publish leaderboards for the worldwide teams in a category. And in Roto Baseball in 2016, I finished first. Also in 2017. In 2016, I actually had 7 of the top 10 teams and 15 of the top 35 on their worldwide leaderboard. And it was all done by bots that were just, again, unemotionally picking the players with the best matchups on a given day and holding on to a pretty small core of players that shouldn't be dropped. And the number of players that are actually good enough in ESPN standard baseball rules to hold on to all season is surprisingly small. It's maybe a pool, maybe 40 players.
Oh, wow. So did you see a lot of variance in those teams, or was it a lot of like the same roster with a few tweaks on the edges?
I would end up with a lot of the same players. That's one of the reasons I really like to do auction drafts. You know, in the great Mike Trout years, I would bid a third or more of my budget on Mike Trout. And when I say I mean the
machine.
The machine would calculate the projected value of all the players and would spend a huge amount of money on Mike Trout. Or Clayton Kershaw in his best years would get a huge chunk of the pitching budget. So I would end up with some very similar teams, not always identical, but I would normally end up with a lot of the same players. And ESPN doesn't actually have a live chat anymore in their draft rooms, probably because of the toxic conversations that used to take place there. I would always laugh when people would tell me that I was doing it wrong and that I was going to finish last, because I knew that spending most of my money on a handful of players was actually the best strategy. In some cases, I would spend all of my budget on 5 players.
So is Shohei Ohtani sort of that guy now?
Yeah. In ESPN, he's eligible in both. He's one player who scores in both hitting and pitching. I think in Yahoo, they actually split him out into 2 different players.
Oh, wow.
So I'm not sure about that. I haven't played Yahoo in a while, but I think that they had decided to have a Shohei hitter and a Shohei pitcher. He actually makes it hard to calculate value because he's so different. But he's one of those that you could easily just spend a third of your budget on him because he's going to help you out in 9 out of the 10 normal categories.
We're moving rapidly into fantasy football draft season. You mentioned drafting some teams already, and I think particularly once training camp starts kicking off, we'll see a lot of that. Do you have any advice or any thoughts about what people should be looking for heading into the NFL fantasy season?
I mentioned I spend a good amount of time on Reddit, and like a lot of other people, I open up the threads on who you're going to draft this year with the number 1 pick. Is it Bijan Robinson or is it Gibbs? I think those are fun articles to read, or reading articles about potential breakout candidates. Because at the end of the day, none of us are scouts. None of us know, what the target share is going to look like for the receiving core on a team, or whether the running backs are going to be a committee or not. Like, we don't know. I tend to read those articles just for fun, but when it actually comes time to draft, like I said, it's a dispassionate kind of process. And I like to take the best projections I have available and just take the best players available when it's my turn to draft. It sounds simple, but there's just so much randomness to football for the reasons I was talking about. Just there's only 17 regular season games, and most leagues, only do 16. Players can have bad days, and it affects you a whole lot more in football than it does in a sport like baseball, where there's 162 games in the season. So I think a big part of it is just like not overanalyzing it. Use the information that you have to do the best job you can drafting, and then taking care of that team during the season. But nobody has a crystal ball with football.
So given that, how do you approach rookies?
That's really tough. I'm actually building a simulator right now that I'm in the middle stages of it. And the hardest thing to do is to project carries for someone like Jeremiah Love on the Cardinals. I have no idea. ESPN's really bullish on him. Most people online think that he's going to get a ton of carries. Very talented college player. He's going to a Cardinals team that had a pretty bad offensive line last year that currently rosters maybe 4 running backs. I expect that he'll get the majority of those carries, but I don't know, because we've never seen him play in the NFL before. And we've seen really good college running backs not do well in the NFL before. So I don't intentionally avoid rookies, but I'm definitely not going to reach for rookies. I would prefer to at least have a season of track record to see how a player is going to get used and how often he's going to be on the field.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I kind of asked that because you mentioned the simulator you're working on. You shared access with me to that, and I've really been enjoying and simulating seasons and then checking out what's happening with the Titans. And I like that the simulator feels like the Titans should at least double their win total. But I have noticed that it is not particularly high on Carnell Tate, who I'm a big believer already.
So that's actually a bug that I'm working on right now. Creating an NFL simulator is super complex. Like right now, I think there's more than 60 individual predictive models that predict everything from, is this event going to be a play from scrimmage, or is a coach going to call a timeout? If it is a play from scrimmage, what's the formation going to be? What's the personnel package? Is it going to be a run or a pass? Are they going to be in hurry up or not? One of the things I think that's affecting Carnell Tate right now is that it's getting the simulator is placing him on the field with the right frequency. Because I think most depth charts have him as wide receiver 1 for the Titans, but it's not projecting his target share correctly. So it doesn't have. And when I say correctly, I'm just assuming he'll get a target share that's typical of a first wide receiver. Yeah, that's something that I'm going in and correcting right now. But I'm pretty high on the Titans passing game this year too. I feel like they've got 3 viable wide receivers now and pretty good tight end as well.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, and I'm very excited to have Dable running the show, and obviously Cam. I think it's exciting to feel like we have sort of a potentially competent offense going in. Because I'll be honest, my longtime coping mechanism with the Titans is that I would just mute the game and put Yakety Sax on loop, and I mean literally, it's the only way to make the hurt stop. You just, which coincidentally was written and recorded in Nashville, so it is a uniquely Nashville song. I know it's associated with Benny Hill, but that has kind of those are the lows that I think we all have sort of experienced as Titans fans in one way or the other. And maybe that's why I'm so bullish on Tate. But I love that pick. I love that they went after him. I do want to ask some more about the simulator because it's been so cool for me to play with. It's literally simulating out games. You can, once it runs, you can look in an individual game. You can see play by play. You can see stats. You can see season stats. You have the ability to look at the aggregate. And you've got some really cool blog posts on there talking about some of the things, some of the ways you drive decisions about personnel packages or who's starting the games. And I think those are really neat things to get a peek under the hood at. Are you planning to do more sort of posts like that? Or
I do plan to do posts like that. Those actually aren't even really public at this point. That site is actually up on the internet, but it's not being crawled by Google. I intentionally kind of have it dark right now. I'm a longtime subscriber to Baseball Prospectus and to Fangraphs, which are websites devoted to baseball analytics that write really nerdy articles. I think I mean nerdy in the best possible way. And I've loved building this play-by-play NFL simulator just because of all the things I've learned along the way that weren't obvious to me. It's answering questions for me, like if a quarterback that was in a pass-heavy offense gets traded or moves to a different team as a free agent, is that team going to be pass-heavy with the new quarterback, or does the quarterback adjust to a run-heavy offensive system if that's where he ends up? And the answer is he's going to keep throwing the ball. And I didn't realize that before building the simulator. And it makes sense. A team's not going to bring in a quarterback that's not a good fit for their system. But, quarterback's passing rate is sticky. It moves with him across teams. I think Aaron Rodgers is a pretty good example of that. I've learned things like if you listen to the games, if you're not playing yakety sax and drowning out the announcers, you sometimes hear the announcers criticize certain coaches for when they call timeouts or when they don't call timeouts. But it turns out there's really not much difference between head coaches and when they call timeouts. It's almost deterministic. They almost always call them at the same exact points in a game. It's just that someone like Andy Reid doesn't see those situations as often as some other coaches do, just because his team is either, some teams are either up big and don't need to call timeouts at the same times as other teams, or teams play a lot of close games and end up calling more timeouts. But that, again, that's almost completely determined by the situation. Coaches don't vary very much there.
Yeah, I know that you hear about people who manage the situations now. Like each team will have a guy who says, we go for 2 or we go for 1 and when to call timeouts. And it does seem like there's sort of a lot of established math behind it. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it warms my heart to see the Lions, going for it on 4th down almost all the time, because the numbers have said that's the right move for a long time. And even the announcers on TV are going with it. And yeah, I obviously haven't worked for a football team, but there does seem to be that kind of uniformity. We're not there yet, but it's coming. The Titans famously punted on 4th and 2 in a tight game a few years ago and got skewered for it. I don't think they would do that anymore.
Did you ever read Greg Easterbrook, Monday morning quarterback column on ESPN back in the day?
Not frequently. I've seen it once or twice.
He banged the drum on the 4th down, go for it, and he would highlight there was a guy who was a high school coach in Arkansas, and they would always go for it on 4th, and they would always onside kick. They had like 6 or 7 different onside kicks, and I think the team won the state championship like 3 or 4 times in a row, went undefeated. And he would always be like, yeah, they're doing it again. They're still doing it. This is what it should be. And it is interesting because, yeah, people are finally coming around on that. But there's so much conservatism in play calling or in these things that, then you get somebody like Sean McVay come out with the 13 package or whatever, and now everybody's going to do a bunch of tight ends or whatever it is. It's just like, oh, that worked for you? Okay, let's all do that. And so I think we're still a lot of copycat, but the first time a team wins it all, but having sort of gone for it a lot on 4th down, I think we'll see that sea change. So the website, do you want to give out the name, or are you waiting a little bit before you kind of go live?
Yeah, the site's not actually live yet.
Okay.
But it'll be 75teams.com.
And do you have a target date for going live, or still just building it out?
I would love for it to be up by the beginning of the season or even a month before the season, but I want to get the simulator right first. Really, I'm targeting basketball season because I've got most of those projections already in place. But I'm actually in such a good spot to be ready for the NBA season that if I can push and get things ready for the NFL season in time, I would love to make it available to people. Again, like I'm just more concerned with having good projections coming out of the simulation than rushing it out there. Long term, where I want to go with the site is the ability to simulate games with players from different eras. So to put together either for the NFL or the NBA, like a team with Michael Jordan and Steph Curry and play against, Shaq and Magic Johnson. Or for the NFL, for people like me that want to go really granular, Mike Webster as the center of your team with Tom Brady quarterbacking and Tony Dorsett playing running back. That's where I want to get. There's a lot of work, and that partly means like piecing together play-by-play for lots of NFL games for which we don't have play-by-play. The detailed play-by-play stats don't go back very far in the NFL. We're only talking about 10 years.
Another thing that I've noticed, and I haven't had a chance to play with it yet, but it looks like you've got some extensions on the website for working with fantasy drafts. Like you can actually hook up your ESPN team and have it run.
Yeah, I was talking about earlier, I used to use Python scripts to draft my teams, and I've built a Chrome extension that if you're logged into the site, on the website, you can just set up the kind of draft that you want to have. Say you want to make sure that you draft 3 running backs before you draft a quarterback, or you want to make sure that you fill out your flex and your wide receivers and your running backs before you draft a tight end and a quarterback. However you want to set it up, and there are some presets. You can just join the draft and turn on the full self-drafting mode, and it'll draft the best team for you based on the projections that you use.
That's really cool. And it's got me excited about fantasy coming around. Will users be able to do that for NBA fantasy as well, or is it just a football?
No, it will be NBA as well. Like I said, that's really been my focus. You asked me earlier my favorite sport to watch is, and it is basketball. So if I can get football done in time, I will, but basketball for sure.
That's so cool. Well, Matt, I really appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to me about this and letting me view the simulator and check it all out in advance. I think it's a really cool thing you're building. I think that a lot of people will really get a kick out of it, and it could be very useful for folks to dominate some leagues either this season or in the future. Let me know whenever you do go live. I'll make sure to let everybody who's listening know. Anyways, any final thoughts before we say goodbye?
No, just thanks for having me. I think what you're doing is really cool. Specifically, just talking about Nashville sports. Yeah, there are so many fascinating stories that you're going to uncover as you keep doing this. Like I've enjoyed listening to your podcast already, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you do in the future.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you do in the future as well. All right. Well, that was my conversation with Matthew Sullivan. My thanks again to Matt for coming on. I think I'd really like to have him back to run the model and preview some NBA when the time is right. A reminder that we can be reached on social media at NSH Sports Report on Twitter and Blue Sky. There's also a link in the description if you'd like to reach out to us that way. We'd love to hear from you. I will also be including a number of links that were referenced or possibly mentioned during today's show down in the description, so check those out. I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next week.